Hey everyone, welcome back to Living Electric. We are talking about two very exciting topics that mainly circle around EV ownership. But before we dive into that, I just want to give everybody a heads up, and I've already warned Alex, I did not sleep well last night, and I am full of attitude. So if this episode is sassy, I do not apologize because that's who I am today. So
Love it. Love it.
just wanted to give everybody a heads up, but we are talking about charging etiquette, and how you really should behave at charging stations, be it either Tesla stations or other EV charging stations. We're going to talk about some examples and kind of give both of our opinions and see where we are either similar or different. And then cost of charging, because that seems to be a very hot topic when it comes to people who are looking to go electric.
Yes, definitely. Especially because I've been charging at home now, so it's much easier to kind of track my usage versus just using superchargers exclusively. I think I can actually estimate cost of ownership a lot better based on some trips I've taken and stuff. So excited to get into that.
Which is going to be far better than me, because you've done more trips than I have.
Yes. Yeah. I don't know. It's been on and off.
Yeah. We'll get to that. But I think we should start off with charging etiquette, because, as more EVs are out there, we're seeing a lot of charging stations, mainly Tesla, fill up, especially in more common areas where Teslas are more popular. And there tend to be from what I've seen, some drama. There tend to be some fights that might happen. People are stealing charging spots. They're getting impatient.
Yeah,
and it doesn't happen often, but it happens.
Right, and unfortunately I think there's going to be some growing pains just across the whole industry, because we're going to realize, oh, everybody has these vehicles now and we don't have enough chargers to support them.
Yeah.
Which yes, home charging is a thing, yes, workplace charging is a thing, and generally you're not fighting for spots at those generally.
Mm-hmm.
But for the fast charging, when people are going on trips, and I've seen it the most, it's usually on weekends when you're there's a lot of people on the roads and there's a lot of traffic. And if there's a lot of traffic, that probably means the chargers are going to be close to full too. So it really kind of depends on the day, because I've come to supercharging sites that are completely empty if it's a Tuesday afternoon, but when I'm traveling on a Saturday, that's generally when I see them kind of booked up, and there's usually only a few spots when I pull up to a site. So
well, that was actually going to be my question to start off this conversation. Have you ever been to a charging location where all the stalls are full?
Yes, yeah, it's happened a couple times. So trying to think. So it's happened. I'm trying to think of the first time it happened. I guess most recently, I was traveling over to Indianapolis, and I usually stop at the Richmond, Indiana supercharger because it's a V3 supercharger. And 4 of the stalls were completely powered off. So I'm pretty sure at those V3 sites, there's 2 power cabinets, basically. So they have 2, usually there's 8 total stalls, but then they're split into 4 and 4, two sets of 4.
Yeah.
So usually you'll see stalls 1A through 1D will be the first set, and it'll be 2A through 2D. And those 2 are kind of split equally, and those all go kind of wired back to the same cabinet, if you will. Very oversimplified, but anyway, when we pull up to the site, all of the number 2 stalls were out. So essentially half the stations or half the stalls were down. So we had to wait to charge. It wasn't very long. It was probably 5-ish minutes. And then somebody had left.
That's not too bad.
So yeah, it wasn't bad at all. But definitely not a great experience, because I had some of my family with me, fiance was with me, we had people in the car waiting. If it wouldn't be as big a deal if it was just me driving, but when I'm driving with other people, I don't want them to wait. So yeah, that's been the most recent one, and probably the poorest experience we had. And I think those stations are back up now, so it's kind of a non-issue now, but obviously something that needs fixed if those stations trip out. So
yeah,
that's the most recent one. And generally that is the issue why the supercharger is full. Generally, like a stall is broken, or I ran into like probably a month after I got my car, we did a road trip and the Dayton supercharger was down, or similar situation where 4 of them had tripped out and the other 4 were working just fine because there was a power outage and it like somehow tripped those off, but the 4 of them were still working. So
Oh my
really
gosh.
weird situation. But generally that's what I've run into when stations are down, when the congestion happens. When they're all
Mhm.
up, generally it's okay. Like it's very rare to have 8 Teslas at a single site, especially where we're at. I mean, in the Midwest, right? So
Yeah. Yeah.
that's at least what I've experienced.
Well, so, with you mentioning like the stations being like down, or like something being like tripped up based like a power outage, is that something you can call Tesla and have them like wireless or like remote and like turn it back on?
Apparently you don't even need to alert Tesla about like a down supercharger
Oh,
just
they
because their
just
software is so good. Like
Yeah.
if a station's down, they probably know about it. So
Yeah.
I'm not sure about the like kind of back end workings of superchargers, but from what I've heard, if they know a station is down, like they're very aware of it and they have a case already for it. So there's generally not even a need to call. Um,
Gotcha.
that being said, they do have a number on the superchargers to say, like, if you have a problem, call this support number. And I've called them before for that situation in Dayton, and it just goes to like basically a mailbox, like a voicemail box to like leave a message about what's going on. So I don't think it even calls anybody directly.
It goes
So
right to Elon's desk.
yes, I'm sure.
Yep.
He's got 40 voicemails in the morning from upset Tesla owners because the supercharger's down.
Right. It's probably just like these owners in like Ohio, like
Right.
We'll fix it. We'll fix it. Yeah, speaking of lines, I mean, like when it comes to like Electrify America and like those charging stations that I've had most of my experience with, besides like the early days of like the Supercharger network, obviously didn't really run into lines there with only the S and the X out.
Right.
I didn't really run into any issues in terms of like lines at EA stations. Now it's probably different now that there are a ton of EVs out there that utilize
Right.
that network. But our very first supercharging stop in our Model 3, we did run into a brief line at
Really?
a version 2 supercharger in Macedonia, Ohio. But that's only because there's 6 stalls, and it was a Saturday
Oh,
night.
interesting.
Yeah, it was
Okay.
one of the first, it was actually one of the original supercharger stations
Okay.
as part of like their first rollout.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So they've replaced the hardware and it works reliably, but because there's only 6 stalls and it's, a version 2, it's a little slower. But we only had to
Gotcha.
wait like 5 minutes. So like it wasn't that big of a deal.
Right.
But what was nice is that like there was a car behind us, and then the moment one of the cars moved, we drove in, and then that person waited until, the next car.
Gotcha. That's
Yeah.
good.
Yeah, which is, there was no issue there, which is nice. Yeah.
Oh, that reminds me, there was another situation. We were driving to Indianapolis again, but had stopped at some other station, like closer to Indianapolis, and had plugged in, or had not plugged in yet, but got there, and there were like 2 cars waiting in front of us when we got there. All 8 stalls full, and 2 cars in front of us. So.
Oh, no.
Which is always kind of weird because like you get to these stations, it's not like there's a queue, it's not like you're like in a literal line waiting to charge. They're just kind of parking spots, right? So I kind of pulled in like next to everybody else that I assumed was waiting and tried to kind of gauge who was there first, because there were 3 of us, so one of those other 2 were there first. So very weird situation, but I think we didn't wait too long. I think it was maybe 10 minutes and 2 cars left and we were up next, so it was generally pretty quick. But it's kind of a weird scenario because like a Costco gas line, like there's a literal line where you're waiting to fuel up your car, right? Whereas charging, it's kind of like a free for all almost, which I think where some of the disagreements or like fights arise with that stuff.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, it's tough because like a lot of charging stations are just in parking lots, like they're like the Costco gas line. It's you're driving through, to get gas, like it's a specific location for that purpose.
Yeah.
But like purpose, not porpoise.
This is a dolphin podcast.
Right? Yeah, seriously. Wow, it reminds me of my Halloween costume, dressing up as a third-party political figure of the Porpoise Party. I have pamphlets if anybody wants to see that. Right? Yeah, exactly. But like most charging stations, unless they're like at a gas station, they're in a parking lot, and a lot of the new superchargers, they're installing general parking signs, because they're installing them in general parking lots. So like it's going to be interesting to see how that pans out as more EVs come out and more Teslas come out. Yeah, how that's going to work with lines, and because most parking lots aren't really designed for a car to be sitting there, and then more cars and more cars, like
right. Yeah. It's for people to like stop and then leave, not stop and then move and then park again and, then leave. So yeah, you're right.
Yeah, so it'll be interesting. Now, the next question I have for you: have you ever been unplugged by somebody, like when you're at a charging station?
I have not. I've actually got a positive story here.
Oh, good.
I've been plugged in by people, which has been super helpful.
Nice.
So a couple different scenarios. I was visiting my alma mater, Ohio Northern. And there's a level 2 charger that one of the alumni has donated, actually. It's an old Clipper Creek charger that got installed. I think it's been there as long as I can remember. Like, even when I was going to school there, it was there. So
wow, old reliable.
Yeah, I know. I'm getting old now, too. So, and somebody was charging when I pulled up, but I needed to plug in there overnight because I was staying the night at the hotel, and I just left my business card on there, and I said, hey, like, no rush to unplug, but when you're done, do you mind plugging me in? And they texted me and said, hey, saw your business card. I've got to be here for another hour or two, but I'll plug you in once I'm done here. So I let it go, but then like a couple hours later, I got the notification on my phone that your car has started charging. So I was like, oh, that's great. Similar situation. I was in the town where we live. I was downtown just doing some shopping, and there's a free level 2 charger not too far from town, so I usually park there while we're shopping around. And similar situation, I backed into the spot, but 2 people were charging there, and I had left another note saying, hey, if you're like, no rush, like, I don't need a charge, but if you can plug me in when you're done, that would be great. So I plugged in, or they plugged me in. I got a notification probably an hour later that like my car had been plugged in. So
oh, that's awesome.
Couple good scenarios there where everybody I've encountered like in a situation like that is very open to plugging in your car if you are waiting. And those are both level 2 chargers though, so it's a little bit more like people are staying there a lot longer. Usually, like, you're not fighting over spots for level 2 charging generally. So
yeah. I've never had like an example happen to me like directly, just because like most of my charging obviously happens at home. Like like I've had experience with like level 2 public charging, but nothing to the point where somebody would unplug me. Yeah. But that's always been a big concern of mine, and that's why when I go shopping, or when we were shopping for EVs, I specifically wanted a vehicle where the charger would lock itself into the charge port when the car's locked. And the
are there
good news
EVs
is
that don't do that?
Yep.
I assumed all of them did. But...
Yeah, the Bolt doesn't do that. I don't think
really?
Somebody who's owning a Mach-E might correct me with this. I don't believe the Mach-E locks the level 2 charger. It locks the level 3, like the DC fast charger.
Gotcha.
But I don't believe a level 2 locks. And I don't. And I know the Nissan Leaf locked, so I think it's really only the Bolt and possibly the Mach-E. But I know our Bolt never locked. But that, to me, that was like a really important characteristic of an EV is to have the connector locked to the vehicle. That way it can't be unplugged.
Yeah.
Yeah. Huh. And that's why we bought this little accessory for the Tesla AC, the J1772. Yeah, or the green to red adapter, or red to green. No, green to red. Yeah, getting that mixed up. It's like a little 3D printed lock that when you slide it over the adapter, and when you connect the green plug to the red. Man, I'm getting this all mixed up. To the red adapter, it doesn't allow the person to pull that connector out because it holds the spring down of that connector.
Give me one sec. I've got one sitting by me, and we can show it for the video podcast.
Thank you, Alex, for demonstrating how this accessory works. So Alex has a mobile connector. It has a green standard, or J1772 for engineering terms. And the Tesla adapter that you can purchase that connects to the green that then works on your red standard, or the Tesla standard, ta-da, using a camera lens.
It's not that
big. No, it's not. That almost looks like a Chatamo. So, Alex, if you don't mind demonstrating the little clicky, the spring, there we go, that unlatches the connector from your vehicle. There is an accessory you can purchase online that it's a little ring that has this most of them are 3D printed. You slide it over the Tesla adapter and it actually locks the J1772 or green standard to your vehicle.
Right.
So people can't pull it off your car.
Yeah, it essentially holds this pin down so you can't unlock it. Because you need to, there's actually an actuator in this little thing. Did you know that?
Yes. Yeah,
so
you're explaining this so much better than me.
You can hear, obviously you can hear the click probably when I'm doing that, but there's you could actually hear a little thing click open while you're doing that. So it knows, usually the car knows when you do that. That's generally how I unlock my car if I'm using one of these out in public, is I'll pull down on that and then my car will unlock as soon as I do that. So if you have that thing in there, then somebody can't come up and do that. You have to manually unlock it in the app, right, to unlock the charger. So,
exactly. Yeah. And it works really well. We've tried it on our home charger, and it's still, what's really nice is that it does disconnect the charge, where your car will stop charging. But then the moment you let go of the actuator or the the holster, and it reestablishes that connection, it charges again immediately. So it's a nice accessory to have. But I do know that it has been relatively common for people to start unplugging vehicles and plug in their car. Yeah. So don't do that.
Yeah, that's definitely a no-go.
Yes, unless you get approval from that driver that's charging to unplug them when they're good, then yeah.
Right.
But other than that, don't assume.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of I've definitely noticed that more on level 2s. I think the main thing with charging spots is obviously don't park there if you're an EV. If you're not an EV, sorry, don't park there if you're not an EV. Although I feel like signage is generally part of the issue too, because it'll if it doesn't specify that it's an EV only spot or an EV charging only spot, then people just assume you can park there. And if you're not an EV, then well, who cares? It's just a parking spot, right? So
yes, yeah.
So generally, I say don't park there unless you're an EV, especially if there's other open spots. I kind of equate. Obviously, it's not as bad as a handicap spot. I think that's much worse, but it's kind of similar vibe to that. You shouldn't park in a handicap spot if you're not handicapped, right? So obviously, way different with an EV. So but that's generally what I equate it to is don't park there unless you have an EV, and don't park there even if you are an EV unless you're actually going to charge, because the goal of that charging spot is to charge a car. It is not to be a parking spot, and it's not to be a closer spot to the entrance because you have an EV. Generally, it's for charging. So unless you're doing unless you're actively charging, that's the only time really you should plug in.
Yeah, and you brought up a good point. If you're not charging, don't park there. It's actually starting to become a trend where Tesla drivers are parking at EA stations or Electrify America stations and just leaving their car and not plugging in. And obviously, that's taking a spot from a vehicle who needs it. Who could be using it. So yeah, don't take the spot unless you absolutely need it.
Yeah, and I it would be the same thing if it's a similar but different thing if you pull up in your gas car and just go park at a pump because you've got to run in to grab a snack real quick. Yes, there's probably other pumps open, but what if 4 more people pull up right after you leave your car and block all the other pumps, and now somebody's waiting? It's a rare case, but it's still, I just feel like it's rude to park somewhere if you're not going to be using the equipment that's there, right? So
yeah, it's definitely. It's not the end of the world, but like you said, it's rude. Actually, it could be the end of the world if somebody needs that in an emergency. But worst case scenario. But Yeah. Just leave the charging spots open unless you're going to utilize it. Moral of the story.
That has probably bugged me more than anything. Like, and it bugged me a lot at the superchargers near where I live, because before I had home charging, that was my only charging option. And like, I felt like I would go there and it would be busy all the time. And I'm like, there's no way people are traveling right now. They're probably like have home chargers and can go charge there. They just want to charge up quicker at the supercharger or something like that.
Yeah.
So not to be like you can't use the superchargers, but like generally I would probably leave like fast charging open unless you really are like need to charge up faster or on a road trip. Like if you've got charging at home, like probably stick to that, especially with more EVs coming on the market. Because sometimes there are people that are traveling and need those superchargers, and I've talked to people at superchargers sometimes that are like, I'm just here because I've got free supercharging or something like that, because they've got an old Model S and they're like, I'm cheap, so I'm just gonna like charge here. I'm like, well, that's kind of blocking a spot for people that might actually need it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah.
And,
I mean, like I mentioned, like not actually like almost 100% of my charging happens at home now.
right.
So like when I am out and driving and I use like a supercharger or a fast charger, like I need it, like because
Right.
I've run out of charge and I need to get home. Like
Yeah.
I don't actively go out of my way to use those chargers because that's not what they're for. You know, they're
Right.
for travelers, the fast chargers, you know, like, but
Right.
level 2 is a little different story. But yeah. It's just I think it's just kind of being mindful of what other people could be utilizing them for and just be respectful.
That's a great way to put it. Yeah. It's not that anybody is more entitled to supercharging or more entitled to fast charging than somebody else, but kind of like be mindful about it. Like there might be somebody that is actually traveling and needs to plug in, or might not have another option and needs that charger if you're blocking it. So generally, like if I plug in somewhere, I like, especially superchargers, I generally don't use them unless I'm on a road trip or I really need to charge up fast anymore, because I have home charging now. And if there's a fast charger out and about that I want to test with my CHAdeMO adapter, I make sure like if somebody pulls up and is wanting to charge, I'll unplug. Like I'm just checking it out because I'm a nerd about it. So
Right.
like
Yeah.
I don't
science.
generally, right, exactly. So I generally don't like plug in unless I really see that it's completely empty and like I want to test out the charger. Like generally that's when I'm plugging in away from home.
Yeah. No, I agree. I just, like I said, I think it's just about being respectful for others. Yeah.
Definitely. I'm glad we agree.
Yes. Yeah. I was going to mention, you said that at the beginning of this, you were curious to see where we would agree and disagree. What's an example where you think we would disagree?
I've had some people push back on the like, oh, like you shouldn't use a supercharger unless like you absolutely need it. Because like it makes it sound like, oh, I'm entitled to the supercharger because I'm traveling and I need to charge. But like in a lot of ways you kind of are. Like I want to make sure that spot's free if somebody's coming through and needs to charge. Like if I don't need to charge there, like I'll leave it open. So
right.
I don't know. I've heard some interesting comments or replies to me saying that, but glad we agree.
No, I glad we agree too. I was curious to see where we would disagree, but I think we agree. Yeah.
Another thing, I'll hop off my soapbox after this. One thing that bugs the crap out of me is, first off, just littering in general, but littering around a fast charging or charging site. And not only littering, but also just like general disregard for the equipment or the site itself. Like, especially if you're somebody that's buying an EV to be green or like be good to the planet, all that stuff, like you shouldn't be littering. But I like anytime I go to my local supercharger, it's right by a Kroger. So it's generally, it gets more traffic than just travelers. Like there's people that live around the area that are shopping there. There's people shopping at other stores in the area. So every time I go there, there's generally like at least one bag of trash, like from a fast food place around there that's just sitting by the supercharger. Almost every time I would go before I had home charging, there would be at least 3 carts that people had left there because they'd shop and just leave their cart sitting right by the supercharger. Bug the crap out of me. I'm like, just the general disregard for the space around you like bugs me so much. And I know it probably shouldn't, but like it bugs me a ton.
No, I mean I agree with you. The thing is that those stations are not cheap. You know, they're expensive to install and they're expensive to maintain. And like Besides like the littering, which I've seen plenty of examples, and that's why I know I think Tesla is actually starting to put like trash cans at some
Yeah.
stations, right?
Yeah.
Like, but obviously that's not at every location. The thing that irks me the most is cable management. When somebody just chucks the cable on the grass or on the on the parking lot and just drives off. Like there was actually a charging station in Twinsburg. It was a dual level 2, and somebody left the cord on the grass, and they were cutting grass, and they actually cut the cord straight in half and ripped it out of the charger.
Oh,
So
no.
it hasn't been fixed in 2 years because
Oh
I'm
my
assuming
gosh.
the city's not going to pay for it.
Yeah.
And and I can't tell you how many times I've just witnessed the cables just thrown on the ground. Like cars will run over that, they'll damage the equipment. Yeah.
Is safety reason or safety thing too. Is it bad if somebody like cuts a cable if it's not actively charging your car?
That's a question I do not know the answer to. I've been wondering because I keep seeing like some of the vandalism of like people cutting cables.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, how are you alive?
So if you cut a cable that's not actively pushing power, it's probably not an issue. Obviously, you don't want like live wires out there, but they aren't live unless it's plugged into a car. So there's I think we kind of went over this in the like EV charging deep dive. When you plug in a level 2 charger, there's like a pilot pin, I think is what it's called, that recognizes a car is plugged in, and it doesn't push power until it notices that pilot pin is there. So if you were actively plugged into a car and somebody came up with like a chainsaw or something and cut it, then it could probably cause some issues. But if it's just like laying in the grass because somebody didn't reholster it, then it's probably not a big deal. And another thing, if you're kind of on the cable topic, if your car is plugged in, your car generally cannot be put in drive to like drive away and pull the cable with you.
Unlike a gas pump. I do want to reiterate, you can drive away with the gas pump connected to your car.
Yes, you can, because your car has no way to tell that a gas is being put in the tank.
Right.
Which seems, honestly, that seems like a complete oversight by gas vehicles.
I know.
How easy would it be to put a sensor in there that says, oh, something's blocking this sensor. It might be a gas pump. We're not going to let you shift into drive. How easy would that be?
I know. And especially because like any small amount of static electricity can cause it to just, burst into flames. Like, yeah. I don't know how they've overlooked that, but it's
not sure.
Not sure. But I didn't mean to cut you off. I'm sorry.
No, you're good. I was going to say the same thing. So another thing with cables is the cable management can sometimes be the faults of the installer as well. If they decide, especially with level 2, because sometimes people will be cheap and they're like, we just want to install charging, and then not install cable management because they're like, it'll be fine. It'll just sit on the ground. And keep in mind, these are anywhere from like, I've seen as short as like 13 feet all the way up to like 25-foot cables. So that's not a short distance. And and they can obviously get in the way. They could get run over a lot easier if they're don't have proper cable management and aren't kept up off the ground. So
yeah. And I've seen plenty of examples through, like my research with my job of just damaged connectors and cables that have split in half from cars running them over. Like, yeah.
And that is the number one thing that breaks on EV chargers outside of everything. Like cables are the number one thing. So keeping care of those, that's probably another etiquette type thing, is make sure you reholster the cord. If it was tied up or wrapped up a certain way, it's probably good to kind of wrap it back up a little bit so it is up off the ground. I know like a lot of the level 2 stations I've seen, especially kind of the non-networked cheaper ones that people have installed, which is, I love that people are installing charging, but you've got to keep care of it and make sure it's wrapped up and put back where it needs to go. So
yeah. So basically, to summarize this whole conversation is just be mindful of your location, how you're utilizing the equipment, and how you're treating the equipment. Just be respectful. Like, yes. Yeah. don't cut cables. Don't run them over.
Try to avoid taking a garden shears and cutting cables while you're while you're charging.
Yeah, that was a very sad day when I stumbled upon that charger, because that was one that I helped, raise awareness for.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Jeez.
So that hurt my heart. I'm like, ooh,
that hurts.
Yeah, that one hurt.
Yeah.
But
it is so funny though. You're so right. It's like, if people were just like a little bit more respectful, we'd have no issues with anything. It's I hate that sometimes we have to tell people that, but
I know
you're so right.
But the thing is the general public, as more people get into EVs, not everybody's going to be like that, you know, and that's not something I think that like we should like stress over. I just think it's something that we should just reiterate,
absolutely.
just
Absolutely.
I've never seen a gas pump just chucked into, into grass.
Fill up your tank and just throw the nozzle. Like, what are you doing?
Right. Yeah, just don't flick a cigarette after you do it. Not good.
I did have one final question for you.
I like questions.
This got brought up. I think I was watching a Mr. EV video. Have you watched his videos before? I think Andrew Tillman is his name. I think he's over in Europe.
It sounds familiar.
Okay. He's got like a pink logo.
Oh, yeah. I follow him on Twitter.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I think I've seen some
So
of his
he
stuff.
posted a video about EV charging etiquette, which is kind of part of what sparked this episode idea too. So we'll drop his channel link down below. But he was talking about a time he was at a fast charger and a vehicle was plugged in, had like the connector attached, but was not actively charging. He recognized the vehicle, and I forget what type of vehicle it was. I think it was like an ID4 or something. But generally, like, cars will have like a green light or something, so you can see that they're actively charging, right? Mm-hmm. He didn't see this light. He was able to remotely activate the station because it was like it noticed that a car was plugged in, but nobody was charging. So he unplugged the cable and plugged it into his car because he was like, hey, this person's not pulling any electrons. I should be able to unplug them just fine and plug in my car. How do you feel about that situation?
Well, now I need to know, how did that pan out for him? Like, how did that end?
So in the video, the guy who had his car unplugged was pissed. He was not happy about it because he's like, do not touch my car. I was plugged in. You should not be unplugging my vehicle. And like, he tried to explain to him, I'm like, hey, your vehicle is done charging. I figured you were fine, and I plugged in my car. Like, I'm terribly sorry. Like, I'll let you plug back in if you need to charge more, but it looked like you were done, so I unplugged you. And this guy, like, I don't think he really had a good response. I think he was just kind of mad that somebody touched his didn't even touch his car, touch the cable that was plugged into his car. So yeah.
So, well, one that's a little surprising because the ID4 does lock the connector to the vehicle. So
I'm wondering if it wasn't properly seated or some other kind of issue like that.
Yeah. That's tough because I don't think you should ever assume that a car is fully charged. Like maybe if there is like some type of connection issue, as we know, a lot of networks aren't exactly perfect when it comes to software, and like some of the initializing charges can have issues, and some people just don't know better and they just walk away in this instance.
Yeah.
I think for me personally, I wouldn't have assumed that he was either done charging or that the car even charged at all. I personally would have tried to start the charge for him. And if the car did signify that it was fully charged, or if like maybe something was different, I don't know. I wouldn't have touched his vehicle. That's just my opinion.
Yeah.
Like, unless I absolutely needed it, then for an emergency, but I don't know.
Yeah, and I'm not sure about the whole situation because I think he did mention something like that he's like, I tried to start the charge remotely and it basically said like charge complete immediately. So I think he was able to somehow verify that like it had reached its charge limit. So it was not like they were waiting to start the charge or something like that and they just haven't done it yet. So
yeah, see, that's a different story. Like if he confirmed that it was fully charged, then But I'm just like almost like slightly shocked that he was able to get the connector out, because our ID4.
That was my impression too. I'm like, if it was properly locked to the car, then it might not be an ID4 too. I can't remember exactly the model of car, so it might have been one that wasn't able to be locked. Because I assumed all the cables locked when you plugged them in, but I guess that's not the case. So Yeah, I assumed that if it was actively charging, then you wouldn't be able to unplug it. So I think I actually commented on the video asking about that. So I'd be curious to see what kind of the whole situation was. But
Yeah,
I
yeah.
agree, you probably shouldn't assume anything in that situation and try to track down the owner. I think I would probably kind of play it by ear as well. I'm like, if I desperately needed a charge and this person doesn't look like they're charging, I would probably unplug them. But it kind of would depend on the situation and how desperate I was, I guess, to
Yes,
actually
yeah,
charge. So
yeah.
that would probably play into it too, just
And
human
you
wise.
kind of hit a really important topic too earlier when you mentioned like that charger at ONU, like having
Mm,
your like business card saying like, hey, like when you're done, plug me in. Like
right.
and now I don't think the entire general public is going to follow along with rules like that, but they
Right.
do sell like I've seen them on Etsy, like almost like the do not disturb signs that you can put on doors. Like you can hang them
Mm,
on your connector or while your car's plugged in and say like, hey, I've been here since this time. If I'm charged, feel free to unplug me or
mm.
give me a call, like to signify it. But
Yeah, we give
it's
those away for Driver Electric Columbus. Mariah like makes those tags for us so that you
yeah, I've
can
seen those.
put them on
Yeah.
your vehicle. So yeah, that's a good idea too. Just to kind of like give a little extra, especially if it's a like level 2 charger that might not be networked, like kind of a situation like that. That might be a good one to good good option to like kind of show people, hey, I'm like charging just because I can. If you need to use it, like feel free to unplug me. That would
hmm
probably more communication the better, I think, with a lot of
Yeah.
things. So
Yeah, no, I agree. The communication is key, and I almost feel like the networks could do better with some type of representation of how long a car's been sitting there.
mm,
Like, even if like it's just through like the mobile app, and you're like, okay, the station's in use. How long it has it been in use, and how
mm,
long until that car's done? Like,
right.
I almost feel like that would be a really useful feature for people to see. But then again, if the car's locked, you can't get that connector out. So like,
Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know. Let's just. Uh,
Another thing that I greatly encourage site hosts to do or charging operators to do is enact some sort of idle fees for
yes.
chargers. That's a
Yep.
huge way to avoid a lot of these issues if you are on kind of the flip side of this. And with those, basically the charger will recognize a car is still plugged in, the session is complete, so it recognizes a car is plugged in, but it's not actively pulling any power. So like the whatever the charging operator should be able to see like how many kW is actively being pulled. And if that drops to like near zero, then it knows that okay, this car isn't charging anymore, but it's still plugged in. So then you can start charging idle fees, and basically if the person doesn't recognize that their car is full, they're going to start owing a lot of money, and like just kind of a fine to avoid that behavior can be useful as well. So
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. It's actually funny whenever I start getting into that range of like the idle fees, I'm like, gotta unplug.
yeah,
I
exactly.
have
Well,
10
it gives you a
minutes. I don't
little
want to.
little sense of urgency. Like when you
Yes.
when you put money on the line, generally people are a little
Yeah.
more motivated to do things. So
Right.
that's how I feel at least.
Yeah. No, I absolutely agree. Well, speaking of money, I know that we are getting a little further into the episode. I think we could actually split this into 2 episodes if we wanted
I
to
was
talk
going to say
about
I
costs.
feel like we've got a good conversation already,
Yeah.
so we might want to just cut it for now and
Yeah.
talk about cost of charging next time.
Yeah. Yeah. We
So
can definitely get into that in the next episode.
also, I was going to say while we're looking at this, I think a goal of ours for the YouTube channel, especially, I think we can easily hit 1,000 subscribers by the end of the year and start monetizing our podcast, because obviously like we put a lot of time into this and eventually want to make it so that it isn't a complete like waste of time. We love doing this, but obviously we need some money to like keep our Zoom account up and to
Yep.
pay for our time to edit and all that stuff. So
Yeah.
um, generally that's kind of what our earnings through Anchor have been covering. So
Mhm.
um, I think that would be an awesome goal of ours. And if you're not subscribed to the YouTube channel and you only listen to the audio version, subscribing still helps us out. And
Yep.
you get to see demos like we just showed
Yeah.
with the charging cable on the
Right.
video podcast.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And
if you're
hopefully
completely
next.
lost listening in your car, make sure you check out the YouTube
Right.
channel.
Yeah. And hopefully next demonstration, I'm a little bit more awake so I can describe things better because I feel like I've
Definitely.
been struggling there.
Definitely.
One other thing I do want to mention too is that if you guys would like to support us, we could definitely create a Patreon or a Buy Me a Coffee. I think that's another one
Yeah.
of those websites.
Mhm.
So if you want to donate and help us, create more content and keep Living Electric growing, we could definitely set that up. So let us know.
Definitely.
But to wrap up the episode, and maybe we can edit this so it's at the beginning of the episode. Uh, Cameron, I think Covey, I think Covey. So the last episode we did, I did a recap of my charging station labeling project that I did with my job with ChargeWay and our partnership with Arizona Public Services and my epic 9-day trip labeling charging stations. And Cameron was wondering how I got the gig to label charging stations.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so Cameron, not to go into too much of a ramble, my my main job with ChargeWay is actually I'm the data lead on our team. Specifically, my title is EV program specialist doing data and research. But we're a startup, and our team, we have to do everything pretty much. We have to have our hands in everything. And I had the opportunity to travel through this partnership with APS in my job to label charging stations in their service territory. So it's something everybody on my team has done, and I was able to do it. So it's almost like a hazing exercise, as I joked with my boss. But that's pretty much it. It was in my job responsibilities, but also outside of it at the same time. So, but if you are interested in getting into the EV industry, definitely recommend checking out LinkedIn, looking at job opportunities, reaching out to recruiters. If you need any advice from us, we could definitely do our best to, help you there. But I think just showing your passion for this industry, especially right now with it being so early, could really help you open doors to get into this industry. Show that passion, create content, get your name out there, and just build your reputation, because I think reputation right now is really big for this industry.
Definitely. Yeah, now's the best time to join because everybody's hiring
Yes.
that I've noticed. So basically any EV company out there has job listings of some sort. So
yes,
so
exactly.
Great time to join.
Yep. And do content, because I will say that that's actually how I got my job at ChargeWay, was through my content.
I was going to say that's how I got my job too. So it's a great way to practice presentation skills, research, like all the skills that go into it, especially with a more kind of technical thing with EVs and EV charging and all that stuff. It's not really like typical like entertainment YouTubers. So it's a little bit more business-y, if you will.
Yep.
So
exactly. Well, thanks, Cameron, for the question. Hopefully I answered it.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, to wrap up, I was going to say, if you've got any responses to kind of EV charging etiquette, if we missed something here, definitely let us know down in the comments, or I'll pose the question on Spotify as well. I think you can answer, we can ask questions on Spotify and you all can respond to them. So if we missed anything here, agree with us, disagree with us, let us know. This is obviously an ongoing conversation and debate among the EV community. So we're obviously going to have different opinions. So definitely let us know, and we'll catch you in the next episode.